Let's see if we can capture summer in a basket. I'm using a coir liner. I found they look natural and they last for a couple of seasons. This is a 40 centimetre, 16-inch diameter, which will hold approximately 10 litres of potting compost. And to this, I add 7 times 10 millilitres of water retaining gel and slow release fertilizer. But if you're using a specialized hanging basket mix of potting compost, then don't use the water gel, just use slow release fertilizer. Otherwise, what you will find is that the compost will remain too wet, and this could cause problems with root rot. So make sure that you mix it well in. Work it all the way around from top to bottom, spread it all through the compost, get it evenly distributed, and then you're ready to fill the basket. Don't tip it straight in one go, just gradually fill the basket with the mixture, adding about 5 centimeters, 2 inches at a time, then gently firming it so it's nice and even, and try and spread it to ensure that each layer is even and it won't sink or slump when it's filled up with water. And the aim of the exercise is to fill the pot up to within about 2.5 centimeters, an inch at the top, to leave enough space to accommodate the root ball of the plants when we begin to put them in. But it's most important that each layer is firmed evenly. Now I'm using a non-soil type compost, mainly because of the weight, but you could use John Innes number 2, possibly number 3, all depending on the size of the basket and the number of the plants. But the one thing that you have to take into account there is the weight problem. The soil-based composts are obviously an awful lot heavier, but in some ways they hold more moisture and they will help the plants to survive a little better during periods of prolonged drought. With the non-soil types, you'll have to water them early in the morning and in the cool of the evening. All of the plants that I'm using are heat and drought tolerant to a certain degree. It doesn't mean they will spend days without water, but they will cope with the heat and they will survive as perennials, so you can overwinter them somewhere frost free, and they will provide you with fresh young cuttings the following spring. I like to build off the basket by starting around the edges using the trailing plants, and this is Nepeta or Glaucoma variegata. It's a wonderful, graceful plant. It hangs down, it'll disguise the liner, and then you can just peg little bits into the side, thread them into each other, and they'll root quite happily. And in the end, you won't see the basket at all, the liner, and it'll hang down and it'll get up to a metre in length. You can always trim it to prevent it getting out of hand. And I find it's a perfect foil. It creates a cool base cushion, if you want to look at it in that sense, to build the other colours upon. And spread the plants out to roughly 120 degrees apart so they can fill the space in between. And it's hard to believe we'll be putting something like 10 to 15 plants in this, possibly. But the old traditional old-fashioned hanging baskets used to have anywhere between 35 to 50 plants in them. You used to really pile them in. But of course, in those days, they would plant at the edges as well. But we will be planting all on the surface. And the one thing you must make sure you do all the time is just, as you see, sprinkle it around to keep the compost nice and even. And now we're adding a little counterplant, shall we say. It's Bacopa snowflake. You can get ones with bigger flowers, but I prefer the delicate little flowers. And the green acts as a foil against the slightly lighter green and white of the variegated Nepeta. And once you see what we're doing here, we're just filling in the space. And once again, I just pointed out that little bit of that we left at the top around the rim will gradually rise and fill the plant up. But the one thing you must make certain is that you plant the top of the root ball just below the surface of the compost, because if that's exposed, it'll act as a wick. And when the sun and most hanging baskets are exposed to, even if it's a breeze or wind of some description, it'll draw the moisture out of the basket, and the plant eventually will shrivel, shrink, and possibly, as I say, die on you, which is the last thing you want. And as we begin to fill the basket up now, I know it's a circle, but it will always have one side that always appears to be the best. So don't worry about this. It isn't a fault. It's just the way that things work out. And now we're adding a little bit more colour, and this is Biden's, which has got a fine feathery foliage and it sits on top of the plant, giving it just a little bit of height. Because remember, what you aim to do when you're making a hanging basket is to try to create a perfect sphere. So when you hang it, it looks like a ball of colour hanging in the air. And if these plants look as if they're getting a little bit out of hand, just trim them, snip bits off, keep them back like a little haircut. The other thing I've found with the Bidens as well is that it's very generous with its seeds, so you will find young plants popping up. We're now adding the last group of plants, and these are the blue form of Bacopa. You could use annual lobelia, but I've found there's a danger of that running out of colour at some stage during the season. But Bacopa, because it's a perennial, keeps on producing like the rest of the plants, will run all through the season. And this is why I always regard this as sort of being a summer in a basket, is because you have the blue of the sky, the yellow of the sun, and the white of the clouds, which for me is summer. It's getting to be a bit of a crush in the basket at the moment, but don't worry, there's a lot of room left still. There's one more plant that we need to put in, but if you find things a little bit tight, just crush the root systems a little bit, waggle them back and forth so they fit in quite nicely. And here we are now, we're adding the last plant, which is a pelargonium. I use a trailing pelargonium because I like the plants to sort of merge and crawl over each other. But it's entirely up to you. Some people would use a fuchsia, but I find that these plants, I say, are all heat and drought tolerant, which is why I've made them. And it is important not to hang the basket up, but put it somewhere where it can just settle down for about a week, 10 days before you hang it. Put it out of direct sunlight, good light, but don't let it get stressed in any way, and just give it a regular watering. Diolch, and thank you for watching. Goodbye for now, but if you would like to see any more, please hit the subscribe and like buttons.